Well, thank you for coming. We had prepared wonderful slides, but apparently it was decided that we better be articulate.
I guess so.
Without slides and not lean on them to impress you and make it thoughtful. Dana, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Some of you just saw me over there. My name is Dana Dillon. Grew up in Corpus Christi, Texas. Hello, Corpus peeps. I'm now I'm a moral theologian at Providence College in Providence, Rhode Island. I also have a joint appointment in a department called Public and Community Service Studies. Believe it or not, you can major in that at Providence College. But it also gives me quite an eye for, like, we have classes in philanthropy, we have our students placed in communities doing community work studies and things like that. And I'm very happy to contribute some of what I know in terms of Catholic social thought to this conversation for the economy of communion.
Well, thank you, Dana. We met a few days ago, and it's good to pair up with an academic, because sometimes as entrepreneurs we look at our little words and our little practices, and then we realize we are actors in a much bigger game, and other people are reflecting along the same lines. So I'm going to try to give you a more experiential view of the economy and a wider academic view. So let's see if we can make this work even verbally here. So my name is Sanna. I'm an entrepreneur. I run a software business in the DC region in cybersecurity. It's a company called RiskLens. The theme for today's session is, can business be a place for dialogue and encounter? Especially at a time where views of business and economy are polarized in different ways than before, because it's always been. It used to be capitalism, communism, etc. And now we hear a lot of talk about extreme capitalism or capitalism not working, and on the other side we hear about vocapitalism. So depending on what TV channel you're watching, you hear one or the other, And so we want to go deeper into the dialogue and see if there is if we need to succumb to those narratives or if there's a different way, and how does for many of us, our faith experience, our experience of trying to live with purpose define, actions in the economic field. First I want to look at the problem. Maybe I should.
I was going to say we're struggling here.
See if this works better. So first, let's talk about some definitions. Things that, these might make you a little bit uncomfortable because you may recognize yourself in some of these views, And as we talk within families, workplace, if you're in the papers, on TV, you see these two different views of capitalism, and they're defined in very different ways. But before I go there, I also want to recognize that also not being an American by birth, I came here in the States 22 years ago. I very much appreciate the system that is in place in a market economy. I lived in communist countries. My father was a diplomat, so I appreciate the freedom we get when you can have free enterprise, or you can have access to private ownership, where you can see the fruit of your labor, the ingenuity of, and see the fruit of your work and benefit from it, and seeing that many in our society, I think many of you have benefited from the system in terms of good employment, developing good products, being beneficiary as a consumer of always improving products, making great friendships at work, and finding a system for the most part seems to sustain our well-being. But we also are in a society where many of us realize that not everybody is benefiting from this economic cycle. And many people talk about the extremes of capitalism, where how is it we work in a system where 75% of the people seem to be well off and 25 people are not participating. When I say not participating, they live, in poverty, they don't have good health care. And I live in Virginia, you don't have to go very far and see people that cannot house themselves properly, they don't have access to, again, medical care. And people are starting to talk about, this extreme capitalism, where how is it we have a system where We seem to be focused on maximization of profit, but we constantly leave people behind. And some people react to that, and it's like, that is wrong. We got to do something about it. And it's creating problems in society. You know, my family is originally from Italy. In Italy, all the younger generation is benefiting from an increase in occupation, but most of the jobs are temporary jobs. Part-time jobs with no healthcare coverage, no benefits, no social security payments. So it's a generation for 10, 20 years is working, staying at a mere level of survival, and may not have a pension one day, may not have a retirement. That's just, you know, and people say this is wrong. And so when you hear expression of an extreme capitalism, they say, this is a system we're focusing so much on profit, but then what is the cost, the human cost of people that are maybe not treated as they should be in the views of certain people? And so they feel that capitalism, if it's only focused on maximization of profit, can lead to inequality. And in some cases, if maximization of profit is the main goal, then outsourcing to countries where we don't care about the environment, child labor is fine, that's fair game. And so that makes some of us uncomfortable, saying something's got to change, you know, and say we got to do something about it. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you hear people talking now about woke capitalism. I want to talk about definition there. So a journalist at the New York Times, I think a year and a half ago, coined this term woke capitalism to define corporations that embrace social or agendas or political agendas to try to make themselves nice in the eyes of the public. That's how he defined it, you know. And some people are taking exception to that. They're saying, some shareholders say, wait a minute, this is my company, and the CEO is deciding to embrace a social cause, promoting a certain lifestyle that I'm not agree with. This is my company, and they decided to change the agenda. You have some employees that say, I'm this company where the CEO decided we're gonna stand up for this political stance. I'm not in agreement, and if I speak up, I'm being mistreated. And we used to call this hostile work environment. And so you can see there is, you know, and so they feel like if business becomes a place for moving a political agenda, and the right has a problem with the left because they feel like they won over, you know, the CEOs of major corporations, and they're pushing a progressive agenda, and they're saying, who agreed with that? The shareholders are not agreeing. Some shareholders are not agreeing, and nobody had the discussion. Some employees are not agreeing. Is that right? And is it the right way to run the business? Is that the mandate of the business, you know? And are we not squandering resources to promote a certain agenda? So you see that's a lot of polarization that we face in the political discourse. And I lived it for myself in my company. At some point, we are at a stage of development where we wanted to expand benefits for our employees, from the employee only to the family. And for a small business, it's a big decision because it's going to be a big increase in cost. So we have a management meeting. So around the table, imagine a meeting room with 8 people around the table. I bring this topic up, and I hear on one side of the table one guy saying, here come the progressives, free money for everybody. And you're like, okay, this is a great start of the discussion, you know? And on the other side, someone on the other side is like, oh my God, I cannot believe you said that, you know, you're so insensitive and you don't care about people. And we're like, oh, it's going to be a long discussion. It's going to be hard, you know? And I don't know how, but in a moment of clarity, I said, how can we have this discussion? Seems like we don't agree already. Can we use a framework to agree and have a civil discussion about this? And my CFO, who's very much in tune with the discussions we have here, basically said, why don't we think about what this means in terms of our culture code? And our culture code in our company is a set of basically principles we try to live by to define how we want to relate with one another, with our customers, with the community. And the number one statement in our culture code says, put the other first. So I said, okay, let's reflect on that. So moment of silence, etc. And then people starting to speak up and saying things like, well, if you put others first, feels like, okay, we know that a lot of people here are young, they're getting families, a lot of births are coming up, people probably need coverage for supporting them for, pregnancies, etc. We know one kid was diagnosed, one of our employees with leukemia, they needed care, etc. It feels like we should see if we can, at all costs, help them. Ultimately, within 5 minutes, we came to the conclusion that let's work harder to generate enough profits to be able to support the situations and provide benefits for everybody. So somehow our, I would say, culture code, I would call it our spiritual dimension, saved us and allowed us to have a discussion that elevated the discussion from left or right, views of the problem that were probably dictated by what we hear in the evenings in the news, what we read in the papers, our experience, etc. And are able to say, what is the game we want to play? And call to the highest motivation that we have. And so so that's a reflection we want to have here today. And I'm coming from a perspective also where I've seen myself change, and the experience I had in hanging out with people that are trying to practice unity changed my own experience, my own destiny. I don't know if I told this to Dana, but when I got out of business school, I hated business people. And the reason is because the people are coming to business school and they were trying to inflate our egos. And basically for me, it sounded like, okay, here's a bunch of people who are building successful businesses and manipulating others into doing what they want to do and maximize their profit. That's how I saw it. And then one day my dad introduced me to this great entrepreneur, and the guy took me aside. It's like, Nick, you're still not you don't know who you got to be. And it's like, okay, tell me more. You got to decide if it's in this world, you want to be the anvil or the hammer. And you're like, oh my God. It's like, I was completely, shocked by that. And it's like, okay, that's it. I'm never going to get into this world of business. It's because I don't want to become like this guy. I want to live in a world where I can live with brothers and sisters, do great things together, and not just having this antagonistic view. So I was pretty much in a crisis. I was basically on purpose tanking all my interviews in businesses, to the chagrin of my family, until I heard about the economic communion. This was 91. I graduated that year, and so I was interviewing for jobs, and I heard about this model of business where business people saw their, operations as a potential force for good to help people in need, to create a culture in a company that can be very inclusive, where good ideas can come from everywhere. You can treat people with dignity. I saw people that were using part of their profits to help, not people in need, but also, and so people that were sacrificing of themselves to help others. And for me, there was a revolution. I was like, what business can be? I can work with the band of brothers and sisters pursuing great ideas and make money and use that money, of course, for our own benefit as well, but also to help the community out there. That's a fantastic idea. And I tried my hand at business with that idea of service to the others, etc. And I discovered it was my professional vocation. And a view I had about business, that I hated business people, a very negative view of it completely changed around, and led to a different way of basically experience the world of economy and entrepreneurship. And so, and I can speak about how this also permeates to the culture widely. I remember another experience I can talk about, and then I'm going to pass the baton over to her, is I remember, and I'm in a company where we have a board of directors of financiers, so people that have a lot of money that invested in our company. And at some point, we had a situation in our company where this was a very difficult moment, because I had decided to part ways with our VP of marketing, because this lady was not a fit. She couldn't get our product. She couldn't understand what we were producing. So if you're in charge of marketing, it's a problem. You cannot market and sell and promote what you don't understand. So called her into my office, and she comes and starts crying. It's like, what's going on here? And she tells me that she was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. And I'm like, oh my God, okay, there's no discussion I was planning to have. Okay, forget about the idea I had in my mind, the action I was about to take, and tell me more. And at the end, I was like, listen, don't worry about it. I'm going to speak to the rest of the management team, but I'm pretty sure that they're going to be supportive. We're going to take care of you. We have a very good, healthcare plan. And she says, but Nick, it's going to take, they told me probably 8 months, 9 months. I don't know if this is going to be able to come back. I said, don't worry about it. Your health comes first. Focus on that. So any doctor appointment, don't worry about it. Don't count your hours there. We're going to be here behind you. So she left, as in peace as you can be, but she came back 2 days later. And she told me, Nick, the other day you called me, it seems like you had something important to tell me. I'm like, shit. It's like, it's like, excuse me, sorry. Is this recorded? And I had to tell the truth because, you gotta be, she's asking you, and I had to be truthful to her. I said, listen, here's the situation. I called you to make the decision, and she was collapsing all over the chair. Where does it leave me? It's like, listen, I talked to the rest of the team. They know about the situation. They know about what I wanted to talk with you about. We all decided to support you until you got to be healthy again and then find another job. So she was super happy and incredible, etc. 2 weeks later, I had a board meeting. So in the board meeting, I had to explain my board why we were keeping a VP of marketing we're going to get rid of while also asking to hire a new one. Easy discussion, isn't it? No. But everybody in the management team encouraged me to basically make our case, And so I remember making the case in the board meeting, and at some point, there was silence. And I could see some eyes looking at me, like almost like maybe I'm interpreting it, but to me it felt like, Nick, I hope you know what you're doing. And then one of the investors spoke up and said, Nick, we commend you for that because we would have liked to be treated the way you treated this employee. And everybody looked at this guy, and then everybody piled on. And we're like, yes. It was a moment where our company culture was embraced and validated by my board, who is not economic communion, who is not, focal area is not working for Unity. But in the face of concrete examples and us wanting to work hard to make space for this person, etc. And long story short, we now we parted ways with this lady. She found another job, and we friends socially as well. So to tell you, this is for me an experience where even in the face of tough economical decisions, business can be a moment of deep encounter with people, And for me, that converts me every day. It's like, I wouldn't live any other way. If the board decided that they didn't want to play this game anymore, I would try to recreate it somewhere else because I wouldn't accept anything else. I couldn't see the economy any other way. So as I reflect on the economy community, who has been very good to me in terms of experience, so I need to be grateful to all the pioneers who inspired me with their examples. Also realized that the economic communities didn't come out of thin air. The economic communion was born in '91 by the meeting of Carol Luby, the founder of the Focolare, who went to visit a community in Brazil, and as the plane was landing, she saw these skyscrapers and the favelas around it, and basically found herself asking the community if they were able to help one another and make sure that everybody could have enough to live by, and realizing that it was not the case, despite their trying to live a certain community of good, some people were struggling, and so some entrepreneurs came forward, but she also and basically proposed the model of the economic communion. And in the brainstorming in a few days, the model was born. But she also imbued by values that she had read about, apparently on the flight over to Brazil. She was reading the latest encyclical, I think it was Centesimus Annus, on the economy. And so she had a sensitivity about, economic and business probably having a role to play with this. And so I want to ask Dina about, is our experience unique, or, it feels like we are like a branch in a much larger tree, and that in the Catholic Church, these topics have been discussed for a while. And when the other day I Googled about Catholic social teaching, I saw, 150 years, it's a long time of discussion. So I feel like I'm probably a grandchild of that experience, but I don't know the theory. And sometimes knowing where you're coming from, what the pillars are, may give us also more tools and more criteria to assess our situation and work in the economy.
So here's what, 10 minutes on 150 years of Catholic social thought for you. As Nick says, so the first modern encyclical Catholic social thought, 1891, Pope Leo XIII. It was on the condition of labor, or sometimes called on the condition of the working class. And so kind of embedded into Catholic social thought from the beginning, or the beginning in this modern era, because in a lot of ways it's just how do we live the gospel in these aspects of our lives, right, our economic lives, was this idea, the concern of the dignity of work and of workers. As Nick says, it's 1991 as Chiara flies into Sao Paulo, right? Sao Paulo, I might get my little Spanish and my Portuguese, I think. But so she's reading the document on the 100th anniversary of that first document, right? And so there's really this whole century of labor. And not long after that document, so it's 2000, well, it's earlier than that, but John Paul II says, I look back at this history, 100 years at that point of Catholic social thought, and we've had these great documents, this moment where Leo is responding to the Industrial Revolution, and this moment where the popes are responding to the the Great Depression, and then the wars, and all these things. And he says, what we need, kind of like the Catechism, we need a compendium of the social doctrine of the Church. That document ends up getting put together and published in 2005. And so that's this attempt of the church leadership to kind of put together in some key principles these things that have come out of this historical moment and that historical moment. So when the compendium talks about the foundational principles of Catholic social thought, they talk about four. One is primary, and the other three follow from that. The most primary one is the dignity of the human person. When they talk about this idea that we are created in the image and likeness of God. We are a unity of body and soul, so the spiritual lives matter, but so do our material lives, right? That need to feed ourselves, clothe ourselves, have the shelter that we need, the health care we need, all these things. We're open to transcendence. So we're called to a life that is beyond this life that is in front of us, and we encounter it all the time. Each of us is unique and unrepeatable. We have our rationality and our intellect, and we have freedom. And we need to find ways to use it for the common good and some other things. We'll come back to that in a moment. But the other thing I want to loop back to, when we say we are made in the image and likeness of God, we are made in the image and likeness of a God who is persons in communion. So we are, by our nature, inherently social. And this is really, really important. Of course, it connects to the spirituality of unity and all these things that Focolare like to talk about so much. But it also connects to these next three principles. Because it is because of our deep unity, this inherently social nature of the human person, that the church can say, you know what? We have a common good. And the way the church defines, the Catholic social thought defines the common good, and I want you to think about this with me for a moment. It is the good of all persons and the good of each person. The good of all and the good of each. Where those two are not understood as being in conflict with one another, but because we are inherently social, my good serves your good, and your good serves my good, and we are not all good unless each of us is good, right? And I don't mean morally good. I mean, do we all have enough to eat? Do we all have a place to stay? Do we all have health care, right? And so this is where the tradition also sometimes talks about the preferential option for the poor. The best way to ask, are we all good? Are we attaining that common good? Is how are the least of these doing, right? How are the ones who are most vulnerable, most on the margins, How are they doing? Because if there are some who are not flourishing, we are not flourishing, right? And that's the common good. It's a really, really important concept. And I got to tell you, I fight with undergrads all the time. So you mean the greatest good for the greatest number? Nope. I mean the good of all and the good of each. And I like to tell them, it's a little crazy. But you have to remember, I'm a theologian. I'm from a field where we believe in a God who is both 3 and 1. Everything else in the world says you can't be 3 and 1. You've got to be 3 or 1. Or you could be 2, or you could be 4. But you can't be 3 and 1. Well, guess what? We believe in a common good that is the good of all and the good of each. And we believe we can come a lot closer to it than we do. Subsidiarity. This is, so foundational is the dignity of the human person. The next one is the common good. The next one I want to talk about is subsidiarity. Now, subsidiarity, subsidium is a Latin word for help. And you've probably heard about subsidized housing or subsidized lunch or subsidized student loans or something like that. This is the idea that somebody is helping pay for something. And the way Catholic social thought thinks about this is we understand all of the world to be kind of constructed through this loose set of communities, right? And so the larger communities have an obligation to help the smaller communities when they're in need. But they do that in a way that should not supplant the initiative of those smaller communities. So, example, there's some kind of huge crisis, a hurricane in Houston or New Orleans or all the places that the disasters hit. FEMA, there's a state of emergency. The federal funds are released to help that local community deal with the crisis. But nobody should come in and say, and here's how we're going to rebuild the Ninth Ward in New Orleans, right? You should have local communities think about that. So it's this idea that those larger communities need to help the smaller communities when they need help. There's also a kind of flip side obligation of participation. So smaller communities need to participate in building their own communities and also serving that larger common good as well. So it's kind of a two-way street of this idea that we need to help participate in building the common good. And the last one that I want to talk about just a little bit, so we've got subsidiarity and the common good. The third one that builds on the dignity of the human person is solidarity. And John Paul II really kind of makes this into the concept that it is. And he offers like two sort of aspects of solidarity. First of all, it's a bond of interdependence that sort of serves to connect us all. Right? So it's that bond that we feel, that sense of solidarity. But he also says that it's a moral virtue. It's a moral virtue that actually, as we grow in it, helps us to live out that firm and persevering commitment to the common good that we're called to, so that we're really responsible for everyone as we build up the good of all and the good of each of us. And he really underscored this in a very significant way. And in fact, talked in some ways that the contrary vice, sometimes people who are into virtue ethics talk about virtues and their contrary vices. The contrary vice is indifference, right? So when I am in solidarity with you, I have a commitment to your good as part of the common good. When I have that indifference, I'm the priest or the Levite walking by the beat up man. I don't care that my neighbor's in a ditch, right? So these are general ideas, right? The dignity of the human person, common good, subsidiarity, and solidarity that really found all of Catholic social thought. And I still have a little time, good, because I also looked through and I kind of came up with, drawing from mostly the compendium, kind of 7 principles for how these and Catholic social thought more generally kind of apply to business and the marketplace. So let me talk through these, and you're going to see how they're connected to the ones I just mentioned. So the first one, building on this idea of the dignity of the human person and that sense of like our freedom and all these kinds of things. So the dignity of every person is irrevocable, inviolable. It doesn't depend on any aspect. It doesn't depend on whether you're old or young, disabled, black, white, male, female, anything, unemployed, employed. None of these distinctions that we might try to say, well, this person's a little bit more valuable than that person, or as our economics too often, like, what are you producing or consuming? Well, your value as a human person does not depend on that in any way. So we're called to treat every coworker, client, customer, rival in accord with that dignity. And also the human person, as the church sees in the dignity of the human person, is not only the source, center, and purpose of every social institution, it's also the measure of every social institution. So what we can ask about any community, including any business, is, does this serve the dignity of the human person and the common good and all these things, or does it not? And we can really evaluate to some extent whether we want to be a part of it or not based on that. Again, you'll hear how I'm hitting the same themes. The intrinsically social nature of the person means that we are deeply connected to one another, even when we feel divided. And this is really an important aspect of how we can enter our work, trusting in that unity, trusting in that connection that's always there, trusting in the commonality of our common good, and trying to work to realize that in how we treat each other in every day-to-day encounter that we have. So the third one is coming back to this understanding of the common good as this good of all and the good of each. This is really a crucial part of just how we measure each and every institution. Now, so that's the kind of repetitive part. So now we get to the fun part. The free market actually, again and again, comes up in Catholic social thought. This surprises students sometimes. It's a good. It's seen as primarily a good, but there are certain checks on it. It's a good insofar as it ensures a certain efficiency in getting people the goods and services that they need to flourish. Again, this comes back to this idea of the common good. But efficiency or profit cannot become an end in themselves, and they cannot come at the expense of persons. So the market has to be ordered not to its own ends, but to the person and to the common good. And there's particular concern that equitable distribution of wealth and the virtue of solidarity, you see how this keeps looping back, right, are part of the full human flourishing to which the market is ordered, right? So it's a good, but only when it's properly ordered to human flourishing. The next one is a strong value on personal freedom in economic matters. This comes back to that very idea of the human person as free. It's a really important part of this. They tie that in then to the right and responsibility. So it's both a right and a responsibility, right? To freely direct your own talents to the common good in the way you see fit. It's freedom, but it's ordered. And, underscored as well, to receive the just fruits, just compensation, whether we're talking wages or also benefits, health care, and those things that might come with it. So you have that right and responsibility to use your talents in that way. You also have the right to have just compensation for that, for the sustenance of one's family. And there's actually a particular emphasis on creative, like there should be ample leeway, I think is the language, ample leeway given for the creativity of a human entrepreneurship. Right? It's kind of a beautiful idea to think about how can we creatively work together to realize these things. All right, last two. Businesses should serve the common good by offering their particular goods and services for society, as well as a as a workplace and an experience of community and service to workers. So part of what we offer, right, if we're thinking about this, is how am I going to make my business a place where my workers are actually getting to live that kind of human community that, I mean, again, intrinsically social beings. We need one another. We need to feel that we're contributing to one another. We need to feel that our creativity, mine serves yours and yours serves mine, right? How can we create workplaces that really offer that to our workers? And of course, when we do it the best, it's also going to serve customers well, and et cetera. And in fact, just to give you a little bit more language that I've made a note of, the economic dimension of the work is important, but it also serves as a condition for the pursuit of more important social and moral goods, especially important to be pursued in common. Right? It's kind of a beautiful thing. Last one. Because every business exists within communities that are already there. And those communities are in themselves good that transcend merely economic values. Business can never be reduced to merely personal or even corporate interests without taking into consideration the communities in which they're already embedded. There's always more stakeholders. And because of that human good of how communities are functioning, right? Neighborhoods, cities, et cetera, the business can't pursue its own goods, its own ends, without also taking into account its impact, right? That's part of that idea of making sure every aspect is properly ordered towards human flourishing. Because they say, what, good fences make good neighbors, but wow, bad neighbors make bad neighbors, right? So that's what I really wanted to kind of offer, to just kind of give you a sense of some of the things that Catholic social thought says. And I think, and maybe this is I think the next part is you and I are going to talk a little bit, and then we're going to invite folks into the conversation. But that's Catholic social thought, and you can see that in a lot of ways, EOC stuff is built on that and is really an expression of it. I think we have to share this, right?
Yes. So, no, for me, as I was thinking, that this is a spontaneous dialogue. We didn't prepare this part. And for me, hearing about the Catholic social teaching, which I heard before, but every time for me, allows me to live out what I wrote down at the end of the previous session. On my Post-it note, I wrote a sentence that said, do not doubt about your gift because of the embedded fragility. Hearing about the Catholic social teaching, that we're part of a much wider movement. We're not alone. I'm not alone, and is not alone. And another thing, there is people out there, they have a model for a society where we can build this, economy that includes everybody, that works for the common good. And for me, it's very super encouraging, because sometimes in the difficulty every day of the business, you can get fatigued and tired and feel like, are we making a difference, et cetera. Well, I feel like you have 150 years of history and a bunch of people striving to live that way. It's amazing. The second thing, I think the Catholic social teaching is also, in the church, a big stimulus for the EOC to grow. Because the initial inspiration was not perfect. And this became evident, this made me think about when we visited the Pope, 2019, I think Andy was there, I think John was there. We heard some stimulating things from the Pope. And I think he was talking about subsidiarity and participation, because it said, EOC businesses give money to the poor. Great. But do you know these poor personally? Are you just another form of, philanthropy? Well-intended, You mean well, but, and he says, are you like the shepherd that has the smell of the sheep on themselves? Do you really understand their need? Do they feel that you understand and you appreciate them? Do you appreciate them as a human being and give them dignity? Or are you just getting a handout from somebody well-intended? Whoa, that's like subsidiarity. And then it's like, also, if you have the relationship, they can express their needs in much more detail. And in the EOC now, we understood actually we had a very strong call with the International Commission of the EOC at the beginning of the year where they told us we got to really sit down with the people in need are integral participants. They need to express their needs, and they have the same weight here. And so as you come up with initiatives to help people in need, they need to have a voice. And full protagonist means also that then at some point where they don't need this anymore, they're going to speak up and say, I don't need it anymore. I know we don't create situations of dependency. And maybe they can become actors of change as well. So in your speech, I realized that the Pope in his mind, he was living, he was thinking subsidiarity and participation in ways that probably didn't fully internalize at EOC for many years. And so we're also growing. And I think the church and many other expressions of it are helping us in the process. So.
Well, I'll say a couple things. There's definitely a place for philanthropy and community service, right? This is one of the things that my students do a lot of work. But it's like, in my mind, that is fill the gaps when we can't do otherwise. The best first option is to make sure people have really good employment opportunities, really good ways to contribute, right? So that we will always need, we talk sometimes about our safety net. It's really important for us to have our safety net. But there's also, and we actually would much rather make sure that there are pathways for people to have jobs and to contribute and to have a voice in whatever is happening in their communities. Nick and I were talking a little bit about the fact, earlier this week, I was at a meeting just off campus. We have, Providence College, where I work, has a space that it rents not far off of our campus, because the idea is, it's very hard if you're not, this is such a nice campus, but if you're at a bigger college kind of campus, if you don't know that campus, it's really hard to figure out how to navigate parking and find which building and all these kinds of things. And so in order to facilitate better town gown relationships, as some people call them, our college has this space right off campus. So I was at this meeting in this, and one of the things that we were talking about was how can the local community and the college work better together to solve certain problems in the neighborhood. Well, we kind of look around, and one of the problems is most of the people representing the local community are paid staff at nonprofits that serve the local community. So you end up having different well-meaning people from the college and the local community, and nobody who's really living in the neighborhood, and not quite nobody, but just less than 5% of the people, right? So I think that goes back to these ideas that Nick is talking about, and that are through Pope Francis in so many ways. Even your very best initiatives, whatever they might be, if the people that they're trying to serve, because those people are in some ways excluded from the economy or other benefits of our society, if they're not at the table, then what are you doing? Why don't you smell like those sheep, as Pope Francis's language comes up? And so it's an important thing. I mean, I think there's so much space in Catholic social thought for this creative entrepreneurship. And actually we were talking about this. Pope Francis has this line in Fratelli Tutti where he says, the movements that are really able to engage those excluded persons, these are the social poets that reshape our imagination. The social poets. I think that's one of the things that I was thinking about, I'm not a poet, I'm just a theologian. But what does your entrepreneurial poetry look like that really re-envisions how we can bring our gifts to bear and really invite those completely excluded? But there's so many gifts there, but they don't look like the most typical gifts that, we know how to turn that into productivity, right? There are other gifts out there that can be productive, and but we need the creativity. I see the young people. Be the social poets for us.
That's fantastic. I know there are some here interspersed as well who are already living that, and so get to know them. In the next session, we're going to have a lot of testimonies, so get to know the entrepreneurs there. I think we're at a time for a few questions before we break out in group discussions. Spontaneous questions. If you had we already have one.
Dana, in the principles that you talk about the social Catholic social teaching, I don't know, I didn't hear the common final destination of goods. So I don't know if you want to say something about that.
Thank you for that question. So the question is about the universal destination of goods, which it's so important. It comes under the common good, as does preferential option for the poor. And I cheated because I went with just the 4 very most important that they talk about. But you caught me, and I'm glad you did. Because now, this is the church has said for quite some time, at least since Thomas Aquinas, we protect and believe very much in the right to private property. The right to private property. But that is not an absolute right. That is a conditional right. And the idea here is that when God creates all that is, and creates the entire human race, who at that time was population 2, Adam and Eve, and gives them all the goods of the earth to meet their needs, this is this sense that's what God did at the moment of creation. All the goods of the earth are given to the entire human family. I teach my students, I'm like, this is really hard, but it's also just what it says. Universal destination of goods. Universal. All the goods are destined for all the people, right? Now, there's a lot of wisdom in, well, if I fence my land and till my soil and plant my crops and develop it, and you do yours and you do yours, we're all going to work the land. And at least in theory, the idea is going to be, there's going to be more for me and mine, and more to care for the poor. But that hasn't worked out so well, right? So one of the ideas is, again, we have the right to private property, but that's conditional on all the needs of the whole world being met. And so until they're not, we have to think about the ways to, nobody really wants to talk about redistribution of goods, right? But that's why safety nets and what have you are important, but also even more so because the safety nets will never fill that gap exactly. We need to think about how to share all the benefits of all our productivity better and better. And we could talk about all kinds of particular mechanisms about how companies could better profit share with workers, better structures, whether you're talking about government regulations in different places or just how companies can take the initiative to do it better in their small piece of it. But the key thing here is, I don't think anybody wants to think about, a government should come and redistribute the goods like that. But for us who have more than we need, and again, there's gospel, right? Let the one who has 2 cloaks give to the one who has none. If someone asks you to go a mile, go 2. All these kinds of things, this kind of sense that we owe what we have to other people as well. I'm like, don't get me started. I'm about to start quoting St. John Chrysostom on the extra clothes in my closet I've stolen from the poor. Right? All right, I should stop now. But great question, and as you can tell, I would be happy to talk more about that.
Other questions? Any other question?
Can I make a comment on that? His comments? Is that okay? No, going back to the theology of it, I think Jesus, God, respects our freedom. He wants us to love him, but he will never force us to love him. He wants us to love one another, but he will never force us to love one another. Freedom is a key concept of the Christian faith. So even though he wants you and me to want that universal destination of goods, but he does not want confiscation, because that would obstruct our freedom to love. There's no real love if I had no freedom to choose to love one another. And that, I think, stems back to the theological implications of what you were talking about. There's a social capital that unfolds when you have an alternative way of entrepreneurship and an alternative way of social dynamics within a business. Once you slowly build that new culture, people will actually want to love the neighbor and want to that universal destination of goods. If not, you just have bureaucratic, communist, confiscatory ideology.
Thank you.
I just want to say something in case you didn't know. The economy of communion isn't the full name for this thing we're talking about. The original name is the economy of communion in freedom. So that ties into what no one's forcing anyone within this kind of style of business to adopt this automatically. No one's going to come and get my books and say, you didn't give enough this year, kind of thing. But that freedom is so important, but it's also it's the secret sauce, right? It's the thing that inspires others rather than being forced. So you're absolutely right. But I just want everybody to know that.
Well, since we're talking about a polarized environment, for me, talking about the UC is very healing as well, because it's like, I spoke to my friends on the right, and I speak about the UC, is like, oh, that's a grassroots initiative that comes from an initiative of the entrepreneur being these creative artists, social poets. And when I talk with my progressive friends, it's like, oh, you're taking care of people in need. It's fantastic. And so they don't know they think we're seeing it their way, but we don't belong, in either extremes. And so I think we are working on a different field, so.
If I appreciate that comment very much. I will add I'm talking to myself here. I want us to be haunted. Those of us who have any property, right? If we own anything, I want us to be a little bit haunted by the idea that my right to hold it is conditional on the idea that my neighbor, that all my neighbors have what they need. And again, I would not want to confiscate to anybody else, but I would want to say to certainly any fellow Christian, right? Let's be haunted by this and be called to generosity and freedom, because again, I think part of it goes back to it's so easy in our world, especially, I know there's a lot of not people who weren't raised in the U.S., but most of us who are raised in the U.S. have that kind of little sense of rugged individualism. Whatever little piece of the pie I have, I worked hard and I earned it, and keep your hands off what I have. But that's American thinking. And I mean, again, I'm sure other nations have their own versions of it, but we need to think like Christians and remember, no, everything I have, even if it feels like I earned it because God gave me some gifts that allowed me and partners and communities that allowed me to do that. So I need to think about that, not, damn it, it's mine, keep your hands off. But as it has, I'm more of a steward for what God has given as God tries to meet the needs of all. And again, I want to agree with you, in freedom, I'm never going to come to you and say, and so by the way, I'm taking this from you and giving it to her.
Love thy neighbor is a commandment.
Amen. I was going to say, at the end of the day, I think we agree, right? But this, by the way, I just want to say, this is one of those things of let's explore the little differences, because we're going to come to deeper understanding and deeper unity when we point out, wait, I want to add something that you didn't quite say. You wanted to add something that I didn't quite say. I think it's a gift.
Very good. I think it's time for a group exercise. So we don't have a projector working, so we're going to talk about some of the questions we would like to reflect on at the table level. And they're related to the theme. And so the question we would like you to reflect on and have a discussion about, and you don't have to answer them all, it's just pick the ones that speak to you the most, are what challenges have I experienced with unity or polarization in my workplace? What did I hear from the presentation that was most helpful in bringing unity in my workplace? Did I get any ideas, any creative inspiration that can help me? What other questions do I have? What other insights do we have? What other tools do I need to move forward on this path? Why don't we take 15 minutes to dialogue on this at the table level, and then we'll spend the final few minutes to maybe see if somebody wants to share the result of the discussion. I repeat the questions, yes. What challenges have I experienced with unity/polarization in the workplace? What do I hear from the presentation that is most helpful in bringing unity in my workplace or in my business, in my organization? What questions or insights do we have? What other tools do I need to move forward well? Okay. So enjoy the discussion. So thank you all. I think if we had any doubts that discussion would have ensued, I think has been put to rest as a concern. We have only 5 minutes left. And I'm sure there's a lot of good discussions that have happened. And why don't we use these few minutes to maybe share, if you had a thought that you think is useful or a need to express, a complaint as well, incomplete thoughts, okay, that too. Coming from Carlos, I thought a complaint, it's okay, yeah, I'm used to it. Also social poetry. So if you have again, I thought as a gift, because your experience, your need may be something that somebody else is not able to express or may be helpful. So don't be shy. Open mic here, be concise so we can get multiple people to speak in the 5 minutes we have left. Yes. Come forward.
I just want to say that I appreciate what you said about like elevating the conversation beyond left, right, beyond the binary, and whatever that binary may be. I just see that like I'm not in a corporate situation. I work at a university, and it's like even helping the students go beyond the binaries that they have, whether it's left, right, or whatever it is. So I think that elevating it above it, I appreciated that perspective. That's it.
Social poetry, there is no mind alone. It's a communitarian social poetry. Just entrusted to all your prayers also. So I think some of you are familiar with the Fazenda project. It's an activity that helps people with addiction problems. And in the city of Corpus Christi, we've been working for 8 years to get these people. It seems that we are getting them now in June. We'll start our first Fazenda. And I'm just saying this aloud because for 8 years, it seems like this is a dream and it's not going to happen. Because every time that we felt that we were going somewhere, everything collapsed, right? And so at a certain point, I remembered one of the founders of the Fazenda said, you guys, I'm going to send the missionaries somewhere else in the world because you never finished the process. that's it. We're not going to do this anymore. And so it was good in that moment when you felt, okay, this idea is dying. There's nothing else to do. But like to keep it in your heart saying, I do believe in this and I'm going to work for this. And keep pushing this in different ways until now it seems that we have a person who has also the background, the knowledge to make this happen. And so just sharing because it really was a dream. I remember I met this person few years ago in New York, and he wasn't even so related to the Focolare, but when I started thinking of the Fazenda, I said, this person should come. And it was so funny because fast forward 5 years, this person came. And now he is the one working with us. And so I'm thinking like all social poetry is maybe I'm not the one making it, but I can give my contribution, work my little piece of the mosaic. So that I think the challenge is let's really dream this social poetry together.
Hi, my name is Thomas Cogdell, and I'm from Texas. Thank you. And you gave me courage because I'm also going to ask for your prayers. So our community, Christ the Reconciler, which works for reconciliation and unity in the body of Christ, 20 years ago started a business as kind of an economic engine. And so it's developed over the years, and some of the things you guys are talking about, like we've just done kind of natively, which is encouraging. And then other things we have a lot of room to grow in. But just to say, my circumstances have changed. I've been the CEO, but have never done any work for the company, which is not good. But because of some opening up of time, I'm able to now devote time to the company. So we're actually working on kind of taking it to the next level. And so much of what has been shared here is going to be really helpful for us to consider how to do that, not just in the area of economic growth and profitability, but going to the next level also in terms of how our business can make a difference. So I just want to thank you all and ask for your prayers.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Karen from Illinois, and thank you both for your presentation. I learned a lot about Catholic social thought and the economy of communion, and I think my sharing for the group was more that the presentation left me with a lot of questions, right, of uncertainty and like just wanting how to marry what I've listened, like I've heard here, and then in my actuality in my work setting. So just for context, I work for a law and policy center that does advocacy work for social justice and racial justice in Chicagoland area. And we do things with like from a very systemic standpoint. And so even though with the nature of our work, we have the sensitivity to work alongside communities that are disinvested or are forgotten. But even with that like sensitivity and attention to communities, there is kind of this like repel or being against religion and anything that's faith-based. And so I find myself as a person of faith working for this organization that sometimes that model of like a leader that that shares my values within a work setting is just not there. And so just like proposing that question, like how do I commit to this lifestyle? Because I really think it is a lifestyle. How do you add to a culture that may lack but then benefit from this lifestyle, right? And I think I just kind of proposed that question. Luckily, the people at my table shared a lot of great insight and experiences, and it also connected really well with our keynote speaker of how, not to minimize, what we can bring forth, even though we're just an individual, or we may feel isolated, or we may feel like we are the only unique person that may have this perspective that is not, or may be rejected, right, from a company or a secular setting. So it was just really reinvigorating, right, to know that we all have these questions, regardless if we work for an economy of communion or a university setting, or even in an organization where you feel like they would accept such concepts, but yet there is this kind of repel, right, against certain frameworks, or when you bring forth anything that's value or faith-based. But recognizing that there are moments that are very unique, that you can like be that gift and lean into it.